Hoops, and we are now live. Welcome to the 5th episode of the Mental Takedown, where we try to do this live stream style. Now, I've been trying to figure out on the fly for the past 30 hours how to figure out how this live stream goes. So we shall see. My audience is not that big yet, which for this probably is a good thing, because if we had tons of people watching this, then this might not go down so well. But we shall see, and what I basically want to do in this episode is just look at some of my wonderful clips that have happened in the past 4 episodes, the parts where I have learned plenty, and the parts that I have, what's the word for it? Expanded my knowledge on wrestling. As many of you know from my blog and from various other places such as my social media, that I am literally like a nerdy chess player. By the way, massive chess tournament started today, and kind of multitasking, setting this up and doing that at the same time. But other than that, everything seems to be going quite well. So we'll hop right into it. If any of you in chat have any questions, go ahead, let me know. I'm an open book. Ask away. Anything related to the show or not related to the show. But other than that, we're going to hop straight into the clips and just see how this goes. Now, my first episode was with Pittsburgh 133-pounder Mickey Phillippi. What was interesting was I told myself, don't be nervous. It's just, he's a person too, even though you watch him on TV all the time. And I really do like Mickey is one of my favorite wrestlers in the country. But I told myself, don't be nervous. And literally, I always give a little, before I record the episode, I always talk to the wrestler just kind of off the air real quick, about what's going to happen and what they're getting themselves into, because I am, after all, just a kid in a swivel chair, as you may have noticed that I love to swivel in the back. And I talk to them about how, they always get the full recording before I, send it off. And I was literally stuttering like crazy. And what was funny was, this episode originally was supposed to air on a Thursday, but that didn't happen for various reasons. And so I ended up actually recording episode 1 and episode 2 on the same day. And in between episodes, I drank like a huge gallon of almond milk. I thought almond milk wouldn't have the same effect as milk. Boy, was I wrong. Like, you can probably tell by the clips I'm going to show later in the show with the second episode that my voice was definitely dying towards the end of that. So, anyway, I think Mickey's interview, he's so well spoken. Like, he, could have, like, rolled out of bed 5 minutes before the interview and still did, like, a wonderful job. But, like, But one thing, this clip that I've selected from this show specifically outlines kind of the way he thinks about wrestling, and I thought it was super insightful. So let's go ahead and play this clip.
More on the mental side of wrestling, mental improvements and mental growth can be more difficult to quantify than, let's say, like a physical direct result of a match. How does Pitt make conscious efforts to improve mentally, and how does like Coach Gavin or the rest of the team gauge mental toughness?
Yeah, I mean, our coaches are pushing us like mentally, physically, like in both ways. But mentally, I mean, like I've been talking to Coach Gavin a lot about some things, and it's like, what can I do to put myself in a position to be compete at the best? And like, what have I done in the past when I did compete at my best? So like that's the mental aspect, is like trying to figure out what that was. So what did I do before that match? How did I feel? What was I thinking about? Just like those things. And we actually do emphasize that. Like our coaches talk about that a lot, because the mental game is just as important. And I mean, Pitt in general, as a whole, like the athletic department, we have other areas where they work on that stuff. Like there, we actually had someone even come in the room this year from Life Skills, and she taught us like just like some mental release exercises. And I think some people would like underestimate how much that can help. Like meditating and just like breathing sometimes, like it can help. And like I've done, like I've even done some like little, I mean, I'm not like full on like hours of meditating, but I've done like times where I've just like taken a second, sat down.
All right, first of all, I think that's super interesting because you think of wrestling as kind of these people, we always think of it as kind of stereotypically extremely tough, but you can see that as these universities, as kind of the newer hyper modern ways of thinking, definitely this didn't cross over when many of the head coaches wrestled. But I think what I learned is, a lot of these ideas are much more hyper modern when it comes to the way they think about it. He also talks about in that clip kind of the idea that they use replication, which is interesting because I would argue that there is arguments not to do that, not to try and perfectly replicate what you have done in the past, to try and, you know, um, make sure that you're mentally prepared now. Um, but Pitt seems to have some kind of system where the coaches specifically talk about kind of the repetition of things and trying to nail it down almost into a system rather than a lot more like kind of intuitive, where if you're nervous before a certain X match because it's against a certain opponent, maybe that's more of a normal thing, whereas they try and even keel and generalize and treat each match entirely the same, which many have seen as a good thing. But this show has always been about challenging the traditional way of thinking, which I think it's maybe interesting. There are other points to be made here, whereas, like, let's say Mickey last year, I think that still, other than Soriano, if I'm not mistaken, in the national finals, is still Dayton Fix's only losses in college. So he only has two, Soriano in the national finals and Philippi in that duel. You're obviously going to be much more nervous and much more hyped for that match than, like, let's say a match against a guy in the 50s and ranked in the 50s and 60s. So, it's interesting. Maybe this is not Mickey's entire point, and maybe I'm kind of turning his words a little bit, but it is interesting how he talks about the importance of, like, replication. Anyway, let's finish this clip.
Meditated for like, I don't know, 20 minutes and just like thought, thought about where I am and what I need to do, and just like mentally releasing and not putting so much stress on things.
And how more on the mental.
Alright, I certainly think that that was an interesting clip, and again, thank you so much to Mickey for being really the first one to do it. And for those of you who don't know why my logo is blue and yellow, it's a little tribute to Mickey. He wrestles at the University of Pittsburgh, and I figured that would be, something cool to do, and that's kind of how the show starts. And I'm hoping to do many episodes and maybe one day have him back on. But he really did do a wonderful job, and again, he's so well spoken. Alright, so my next episode was with Travis Piotrowski, who just graduated, which is so unfortunate. I think I can count the number of people on one hand that were four-time NCAA qualifiers. that 4-time NCAA qualifiers that never All-American, really, but he did end up All-Americaning this year, but that was handed out, and he definitely would have wanted to, like, let's say, win. Let's see, give me 1 second here. Fixing live stuff. I'm gonna disappear for 2 seconds. I'll be back on the other side. Alright, I've got to figure out a way to better transition my webcam, but this will have to do for now. But, I can count on my hand the number of people that never actually All-Americaned at the NCAA tournament and was a senior and just kind of got that last attempt stripped away from him. Whereas, many other people, although they've already been All-Americans, national champions, and whatnot. So not that the coronavirus thing didn't affect them at all, but I guess I especially, it really just does suck, and, it was wonderful that he was willing to talk about it so soon. Now, for those of you who don't know, he is immediately going to become a coaching staff member for Illinois, and I think this is becoming more and more of a fashionable thing to take kind of your most successful wrestlers of the past year, or maybe the most inspiring, and instantly turn them into coaching members because, kids that are incoming, so to speak, will have watched the program on TV, watched the people, and, these younger classmen, they definitely see, like Travis, they probably wrestled with him in the room, especially throughout the past 3 or 4 years, however long they've been there, and see them as a role model. And this clip is very interesting. He explains the differences between kind of a head coach and what is the role that the graduate assistant takes on as they come in.
Difference between them or like me and like someone like Coach Half is Coach Half has been through the ringer, man. Like he's an intimidating guy, very successful wrestler in the Big Ten and national level. So for him to kind of give you his peace of mind in wrestling, it's big. It's you really take his words and you turn it into something. So when he's talking, no one else is talking. It's kind of like that kind of relationship. He's kind of like the father figure of our wrestling program. He looks out for us. I bet you he cares more about things like this national tournament and the coronavirus thing going on more than we did, because it hurts him that much to see us suffer and what we're going through. When he has something to say during technique, it's very his way of saying things is, you got to do it this way. It might be harder, but in the long run, it's going to make you better. Like, he'll tell you how it is. I think from a graduate assistant perspective in coaching, we'll kind of give our peace of mind in things and how we were coping with stress or our kind of pre-match routines or whatever the case might be. But it's ultimately something that, okay, like the wrestlers will take into account. They'll either apply it or they don't. And in the long run, it's not really going to make as big of an impact as it would be coming from a head coach or an assistant coach with that kind of like accolades. The difference between them or like me.
Now that I found somewhat surprised. I was both surprised by that answer and not surprised at all. You would think that the reason why they would bring these people on, like people like Travis, people like Aymar, is because they're more kind of in touch with the, general ideas of modern day collegiate wrestling, because the rules have been changed since many head coaches have wrestled. And a clip I'll show later with Vinesober is, eventually everything is going to, and this goes well beyond wrestling. You see it happen in other sports like baseball. It's starting to happen in basketball and football where advanced metrics are going to start coming out. And it was interesting to say that they were just kind of brought on as a peace of mind rather than just kind of supplementary pieces, rather than, I would say, instead of supplementary, I would just say additional pieces. Like, instead of them working under Coach Half, which this seems to indicate, I would think that, the idea of a graduate assistant would be to work with the head coach, because I really do think the clash of generations is quite an interesting one. And although I certainly do understand where Travis is coming from, and this is not a dig at anybody, but it is interesting how the role of the graduate assistant is a little bit different than maybe I had originally expected. Next clip. Let's see what we can do here. Alrighty then. Here's another clip from Travis where he specifically talks about the crossovers between academics and athletics, and this was super interesting because he is one smart cookie. And also, can we appreciate the fact that he did this entire interview from his car? Like, I can't even begin. Oops. Give me 1 second. Something went wrong. I told you this was going to be a quite an interesting and rough. There we go.
On the top,
quite a interesting ride, but yeah. Can we appreciate the fact that he did this whole entire interview in his car? Like, I am just now starting to learn how to drive, and it feels like a nightmare just driving in the parking lot. And the fact that he could do an entire interview in the car is nothing to make fun of, especially nothing to be great. I can speak English today, totally. Nothing short of amazing, and, props to him.
topic of school, you were a major in finance and business of advertising. That's what it is. Do you think there are similarities to the way that maybe we think in advertising and the way you approach wrestling, and how has your overall experience in the classroom kind of changed the way you look at wrestling?
That's a good question. I mean, even in all my classes, like economics or whatnot, a lot of it was hard. A lot of it was stuff that I didn't want to do, and I didn't really apply to wrestling because it was so statistic based or whatever it is. I don't know. It just didn't really apply. But in certain things and ways I would learn, I would apply to wrestling. So if I learned a certain way on how to do things in advertising or in finance, in my classes, if I figured out a way to be successful in my class, I would kind of get creative in finding a way to do something in wrestling. So whether that be not necessarily discovering a new move, but doing something that I don't really do before and kind of just letting loose, or whether that's perfecting a move in a different way from a different position, getting to a leg in a certain position, just that stuff. I don't really think like it's really hard to apply like school and wrestling together, and how you can overcome things or learn things. But at the end of the day, like with wrestling, when you're in a match, everything is really instinct. If you have to really think about what you're doing out on the wrestling mat, it's already too late to even do the move.
On the topic of school, you
Alright, so this kind of gets into two interesting parts of how these things go. First of all, where I was coming with that question, which I'm not sure if I got it across because I'm not the best interviewer, I'll just put it out there. Like, I don't claim to be some like wonderful interviewer that's like knows all the tactics and tricks in the book. Where I was coming from with that was, if you think about the way we think in advertising, is that you're constantly trying to not bait or trick, but convince people to do a certain thing, whether that's buy a product, whether that's, you know, uh, subscribe to your service or whatever. Similar to how you do it in the wrestling match, in a wrestling match, where you're constantly trying to bait your opponent to do X so you can do Y. And what he kind of talks about towards the end there is the power and the importance of intuition. Now, what's interesting is that was kind of one of my overarching questions when I started this show was how much of wrestling is intuition? How much are you actually thinking when something appears on the mat in the heat of the moment? How much are you actually thinking, okay, do this, make sure when you get into the waterfall position, do XYZ. As I've been very open, I have no idea on the actual specifics as to how wrestling technique works, but rather I think it's interesting how the intuitive flow of a match must overtakes that almost all the time. So, what's interesting is, which is a question that I would like to know as we do later, segments of the show is, if you've ever listened to a track or flow live broadcast, you can hear the coaches yelling. Like, I mean, some more than others, but they're almost always constantly yelling at the wrestler. Do this, do that, make sure you do this. And I wonder if a coach actually just didn't say anything for a match and allowed the wrestler to intuitively think on the go. And this kind of counters my point of hypermodern statistics taking over something. And that's why the heated debate in baseball between like traditionalists and non-traditionalists and kind of hypermodernists that, there's like the intentional walk and all that stuff didn't exist back in the day. Whereas here, it's like if a coach were to just let the wrestler wrestle intuitively, what would be the differences? And it does seem to show that the majority, at least, of a match is heavily intuitive. Thank you so much to Travis for doing the show. He was so nice about it. Like I said, these first couple episodes, like I would be lying if I didn't say it was awkward. Like, to just DM somebody and be like, hey, you want to spend 30 minutes with me talking about whatever I want to talk about? That's not an easy thing. So thank you so much, Travis. We'll move on to the next episode as I time for another awkward transition. But that's alright. And we are back. So this is my third episode with Josh Feinsilver, and what was interesting about this one and setting it up for it is usually it takes a couple days to set these things up. I literally texted Josh at maybe a crazy hour of the night, maybe like 10:30, 11, maybe. And I was thinking, we'll see in the morning what he says, because I wasn't really expecting a response, and I was about ready to go upstairs and, get ready to call it a night, and I get an answer, and, usually I do a certain amount of prep for episodes, simple Google searches and whatnot, but I don't do like a extensive prep as much as maybe some of the other shows do. I have no idea. But, and he was like, yeah, we can do tomorrow. And I was like, alright then. And so we literally did this episode maybe 24, 48-hour turnaround, which is quite remarkable. And he talks about here, which is interesting because Duke is one of they have, as he'll explain in this clip, they have somebody that developed the specific algorithm specifically for wrestling. So which makes it less intuitive. And I'll link the video of Coach Lanham explaining it down below, where he talks about how if there's a way that's working that's successful 80-90% of the time, that's the way you should do it all the time. But that goes directly against kind of what Travis was just saying earlier, is that how intuitive the wrestling match has become, how the wrestling, style and its move towards intuitiveness rather than, this kind of hyper-modern statistical idea, whereas Duke is kind of the only program, as far as I know of, that has this algorithm so far. But what's interesting is Josh also mentions in his interview that other schools have wanted this algorithm. So it's quite interesting. Enough of me talking. I feel like I'm talking so much. Roll this clip.
For this episode, Coach Lanham has been very open about his extensive use of analytics throughout the team. Is that something he even preaches, like, let's say, mat side, or something you're consciously thinking about in between periods or in between matches, or is there still kind of like an intuitive element to it?
Yeah. So a funny, like, Coach Lanham and our coaching staff has been very adamant about the statistics. We have our a student named Charlie Gelman, who's I'm sure you probably read a little bit about. He created this like system, this computer program where we can enter in all this data, and it comes out with a lot of trends and stuff of how we wrestle versus how our opponents wrestle. And so, I guess to answer your question is, before a match, the coach may have, or Charlie may have ran like a or like a whatever he does. I'm not sure the exact term for it, but he will have done that, the statistics, and kind of looked and noticed trends where maybe my opponent, he likes to do a lot of upper body throws, and he'll do that more so in the third period or this time. So although like they give me all that information, I still have to, I still have to go out and wrestle my match. I still have to know what I'm doing and kind of focus on myself. But at the back of my head, I know, like, I kind of know those trends are in there. So I'm not necessarily thinking about it, every period or anything, but it's definitely in the back of my mind and kind of something that I'm aware of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, as Duke, what was super.
And ultimately, what I get from that is, however, and this is kind of what in other sports as well, kind of the argument is that statistics will always have to be a supplement to any intuitive element, because sports is intuitive. Every situation is different. Every match is different. There are constantly adjustments and counter adjustments, and it's better to rely on an intuitive feel rather solely on statistics. Alright, this next clip should be a fun one, but before then, we cut to another awkward transition. And so this next clip, also from Josh, is a lot of fun actually. Whoop,
Kinds of things kind of give you a psychological advantage.
whoop. That just started talking by itself. This specifically talks about how, relying on previous experiences throughout a match, which is interesting because we constantly talk about how the importance of experience, but if you don't draw from those experiences and think about those experiences, that experience really doesn't mean much. So go ahead and roll this clip.
When maybe like let's say you're in a similar situation, if you're like down again in the middle of the match in a season, whereas knowing that you've done it before, I guess.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because being down and knowing that I can come back is kind of like a little bit of body armor to kind of make a metaphor of it. Because I know that even if I'm down a certain amount of points, I still have the skill and the ability to come back and win a match. And so that's definitely a psychological advantage that even though I might not have a great first period, I can still come back and win a match. And so I would definitely say that's a psychological advantage. And that wasn't the first, and to kind of prove your point, it was earlier in the season that I had been down and came back 2 or 3 times. And so just kind of being able to use that and fall back on that was, I think, also part of the reason I was able to win that match.
What kinds of things kind of
So that's interesting, and just keep kind of your experiences in the back of your head at all times, and draw on those, think about those, even after the match is over, because if that doesn't happen, you can have as much experience as you want, but ultimately that's not going to mean anything moving forward. And I think that's a very interesting point. And if you guys don't know the match that I'm referring to, you literally just have to Google Josh Fine-Silver and you'll see this picture of him, like he's got like blood everywhere, all over his face, and like he's got this strap around his nose, which I'm not exactly sure what it does, but he went down quite a bit. I think maybe at least 5-6 points in the first period, and came back, and it was one of the most hype moments I personally have seen uh, in college wrestling. I haven't been following it for all that long, but man, you have moments like these where 20, 30 years from now, no one's going to remember them. But that's what makes, the sport so interesting. And so finally, I can't believe that after just 3 episodes, I ended up getting a U.S. team member to do this. I guess he hasn't made the U.S. team, but he's an Olympic hopeful. And that's, of course, the one and only Ethan the Backpack Lezak. And I have 2 quite interesting clips here from his interview, which I think will roll back to back, and then I shall be back on the other side, and y'all can hear my voice one last time before we call it quits for today. And the funny thing is, this roundup episode is longer than my normal episode, so that should be interesting.
a mathematical standpoint, if you even get like a 2-point near fall on top, that should be worth more than the escape. But is it just like psychologically that difficult to think that you would be able to turn, let's say, like a top 10 guy in the country per se?
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, those top 10 guys, when they get set, they're going to be ready to go and explode out the whistle. So just as a top guy getting set, you really have to be ready right there when you get set. And I mean, some guys, they get a lucky jump too. So the refs don't catch it all the time. So you have to be really prepared I mean, just thinking back to me, like when guys got out on me, it was always like the first 5 or 10 seconds. That's the hardest point to hold a guy down. And once you get that first breakdown, usually you could ride him out for a minute, 2 minutes if you have to. But I think the biggest thing is just really being ready to go off the whistle, getting that first breakdown. And then kind of once that happens, you kind of just, I would just kind of flow and flow. And then
If you think about it from a mathematical standpoint, if you even get like a 2-point near fall on top, that should be worth more than the escape. Your very,
is
very
it
last
just,
match of
like,
your college career, psychologically that
you-
difficult? There was quite a bit of drama just before that, no?
yeah, my last match, I think it was 2 weeks before, like, Minnesota weather, it's really cold and icy and slippery. And I slipped going into one of my steps into my house, and it's a concrete step. So it kind of just split my knee right open. And then I was kind of having to deal with that a couple days leading up to Big Tens and NCAAs. And then last day of the tournament, I got infected kind of bad, and it was so swollen I couldn't bend my left leg, so I kind of had to go Greco stance, or stand like straight up in my matches the last couple ones, just to kind of, because I couldn't bend my knee to get in a stance, so I just kind of had to do with what I could do. And yeah, that last match, like 5 minutes before, I was in the back getting my knee drained, so I was able to get like a little bit of movement in that last match. But I mean, it was tough the past like 2 or 3 matches, just trying to wrestle when I can't, get in a stance. So guys are kind of just getting in on doubles right away and stuff. I'm kind of have to, you know, scramble to get my takedowns, whereas like I can't really shoot that much. So it was just kind of tough having to go through that. But I mean, I kind of just tried to do what I could do.
All right, so those two clips. First of all, the first one is one that I've never understood. Well, watching wrestling, why people default to bottom. It's interesting because, which is why I was so interested in having Ethan on the show, is because he was one of the only ones that I can remember that consistently chose top or neutral or a position other than bottom, not because they were wrestling a specific person, but just because they were more comfortable in a certain position all the time. Because if you do the math, like let's say you have a top 5 matchup where both of them are super, super good on their feet and just really, really good on bottom, both of them. What are the odds if you think about it? You have the 2 second and third periods where each wrestler gets their choice, and then you have the overtime periods where if it goes all the way, you get on bottom 2 more times, each. So, what are the odds that you win a match based off riding time? Because remember, the final tiebreaker is if at the end of all the tiebreaks, it does come down to riding time. But the chances of that happening, of you actually winning a match like that, are so low that I wonder if it just psychologically gives you an advantage if you have an extra, like, let's say 20 to 30 seconds, however that may be, that time spent on bottom to get a takedown. Whereas, like, yes, if you don't get it, like, they could probably win the match 1-0, hypothetically. But it's like, if you win a match like that, how much credence does that give to you? That may boost your ranking up a couple places in the flow, rankings. It might, taking other external factors out of it, such as, like, the dual team score, just individually in a match, it doesn't make sense to me why you would always default to neutral, because literally all you have to do, and I'm not saying this to make it sound easy, but I would think that, if you were to get a 2-point near fall, that makes it so much easier. Then that puts that pressure on the other person to get more than an escape. So it's interesting. It's certainly a discussion to be had, and I hope to eventually have a coach on. So this is kind of the point of the show, that somebody who is kind of a nerd brain and likes math and likes strategical thinking, because that's like literally what chess is inside and out, which I love playing chess like 100 times over. It would be interesting to kind of have that discussion. The second clip, man. What else can I say? We have seen an increase over, especially when I started following the sport, of defaults and injury forfeits and whatnot, and, you know, Spencer Lee pulling out of Big Tens. Obviously, I don't know the full extent of the problem, and I'm not faulting anybody for defaulting out, but like, this was talked about going into that 2019 NCAA weight class. That 133-pound weight class was deemed by John Smith as the deepest he has seen in years. And the idea that someone like All-American and beat Roman Bravo, who, I know Roman Bravo is not the same wrestler as he was in 2019 and 2020, because as a freshman you mature a lot, obviously, and now he's totally different. But the idea that he could win matches in such a deep weight class with basically a busted up knee is insane. And, you know, Ethan, I don't think it's breaking news that his favorite position is top. And there are people that are, like, let's just say, more technical in the neutral position, and, you know, to still be able to do that on a busted up knee is amazing. And this guy's mental fortitude throughout his career it's so crazy. I mean, it is so crazy because he, you know, a lot of people talk about Seth Gross' story on how, you know, he was kicked off the team in Iowa. If I remember correctly, he kind of hinted at this earlier in the interview. I wasn't obviously about to dig into it super heavily, but he was kicked off the team for disciplinary reasons as a and had to skip a semester. And, you know, the fact that he came back and, you know, started doing this, and, you know, he had some regular season matches where, you know, it wasn't so pretty. You know, when you are, you know, a returning national finalist, as he was in 2017, and then you wrestle like Spencer Lee, you know, and get teched, you know, he did not look good that match at all. And the idea that you would still have the mental fortitude to come back and, like, place fourth at the NCAA Nationals is, like, really, really insane. Like, because I can only imagine how demoralizing to lose by technical fall to a freshman. I mean, that doesn't sound right. Yes, I know it's Spencer Lee. I know it's somebody really, really good, but it just you would think that you'd be better than that, and, you know, sometimes things just don't go your way. And, you know, it's super interesting. Enough talking by me. I feel like I'm just blabbering away at this point, but thank you so much to all 4 wonderful guests that I've had so far. As to what is next, I really don't know what is next. Actually, maybe I do, but I won't reveal too much. I won't drop any names. You'll just have to wait and see. Go ahead and follow the blog, follow Instagram, follow all that other good stuff that, you know, podcasts and medias ask you to follow. If you do enjoy this show, all of that is greatly appreciated. I hope each and every one of you have a wonderful rest of your Friday afternoon, and we'll see you back very soon next week for episode 6. Thank you so much. Have a good one.